promoting mindful well-being in everyday life. This is the Pragmatic Alchemy Podcast with your host, Courtney Edwards.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the fourth episode in the second season of Pragmatic Alchemy Podcast. My name is Courtney Edwards, and I'll be your host today. I'm so excited to be welcoming Jenna Martin to the show. Jenna is a mindfulness coach and an author. Her book is called Milo and the Wisdom of the Sea, and it's a book that's geared towards helping parents and children bring more mindfulness into their life. When I was preparing for this episode, I really thought that we were going to talk pretty specifically about how to teach our children mindfulness. And we do touch on that quite a bit as Jenna shares about her book. But truly what we ended up talking about was so much more. We talked about mindfulness and grief and capitalism and perspective and gratitude and trauma and nervous systems, and how, as parents, our own mindfulness practice and our ability to be mindful in the act of parenting is so essential. This conversation blew me away. I'm so delighted to be sharing this content with you, and I hope that you find it as just informative and heartfelt and wise as I did. So let's get started with Jenna. Hi, Jenna. Thanks for joining us today. I am so excited to have this conversation with you. I know we've been talking about it for quite some time, but why don't we just start by giving you an opportunity to tell our listeners a little bit about you and the work that you do?
Sure. Thanks for having me today. Happy holidays, you guys. So my name is Jenna. I am a writer, author, mindfulness coach, resiliency coach. I kind of do all the things that help us sort of thrive through adversity and find sort of that post-traumatic growth happiness that's possible. And so I started my career as a child and family therapist in training. And during my doctorate program realized, I feel like I really need to also be a creator. And so I pivoted, taking my psychological experience into the world of web design, and being a experienced designer. But along the path, it's been like, well, but I'm also all these other things. So I'm also, I've been meditating for 40 years. I started when I was a child. Yeah, I picked up Siddhartha from my mother's bookshelf, and that's sort of how the story starts. And so I've been staying on the path of being a therapist in a very informal way, I guess you would say. And so I've kind of made it, I have like two lives right now. I have the life of a XD, experienced designer, and I have the life of a, children's book author, mindfulness instructor, creative journaling instructor. And so, it's a really full life.
Yeah.
But my passion really is, not that I don't love experience design, I do, but my real passion, like what I really love to do is to be of service to people, to moms, to dads, to kids, And so that's sort of how Milo was born, the book that I wrote for kids. And yeah. And so, but, in my spare time, when I'm not doing all those things, I actually am developing a 6-week course for a nonprofit called First Five, where I'm helping parents learn mindfulness and teaching them, sort of step by step what that means and how to put it into practice. And yeah.
That's
So
wonderful. Can you
yeah.
tell us a little bit about Milo?
Yeah. So Milo is a cartwheeling sea star, which if you know anything about sea stars, they do anything but cartwheel. They kind of, they crawl really. But he's different, and there's a whole reason behind Milo being different, so I don't want to ruin the story. But in the first book, he loses one of his rays, one of his arms. And it's like this really painful journey. He's separated from his family, and it's the journey of trying to figure out why he's different, to accept the fact that something terrible has happened, but it's also part of being a sea star. Like that adversity is part of it. Sea stars lose their arms all the time. And it's coming to terms with the healing journey and learning along the way that you can't give up joy and happiness while you're healing. You have to find ways to embrace the pain, embrace the suffering,
Mm-hmm.
and and that can actually make you stronger, right? And you can find reasons to be joyful during that process. So yeah, and he has mentors in the book. There's an octopus. Octopuses also can lose their tentacles, their arms, and so that was strategic on my part.
Just side note, I'm obsessed with octopuses. Absolutely obsessed. So yes, I am. Now I need to get the book so that I can have my own access to octopus mentors.
That's great.
They're so fascinating and brilliant.
Yeah, they really
Yeah.
are. And there's magic, there's some magic in the book. There's a mermaid and um, there's a whole world that I kind of created for Milo. And
Oh,
so,
that's wonderful. And
yeah,
we'll link to that in the show notes. So if people want to find it and check it out, they'll be able to do that. But you had mentioned at the beginning part of your intro, you used the phrase post traumatic growth. And it sounds like that's Milo's journey.
it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
It is. And also, I think, there's this idea, especially around kids, that kids shouldn't suffer.
Hmm.
That it's our job as parents and as caregivers to make sure they never suffer.
Hmm.
And I think, that's a heavy burden for parents to bear. And I think that when you start to reframe that for kids and for yourself as a caregiver, as a parent, you realize like, well, that's kind of a given, right? Like kids are going to suffer. Life brings suffering. So how do we help kids embrace that reality with love and care and compassion? And also give them hope, right? Like this is temporary. It's not going to be forever. You know, there's a punctuation mark on this. I can't tell you when, but it's there, and you're going to come out of this.
Hmm.
And you might even find things that changed you in a positive way, which is the post traumatic growth. You're not going to have the same arm. Like Milo realizes my arm's going to be different when it grows back.
Hmm.
It's not going to be the same, and that's okay. You're right, because maybe there's something cool and different about the new arm,
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know and so that's kind of the metaphor, and I think it brings some comfort to parents because they realize, oh, that
Right.
that's a more honest answer for
Hmm.
children you know
So much there that I want to dive into.
Yeah.
Mostly starting with the idea that I don't work with children, I work with adults. And I
Mhm.
work with adults that think they also shouldn't suffer. And I talk a lot about sort of social messaging. Um, I'll try not to go on an anti-capitalist rant, but I think part of that mindset comes from, we see advertising messages that suggest you should be happy and shiny and glossy and beautiful and thin and healthy and happy all the time. And so we see this message, we internalize this message about I should be happy. And if I'm not, there must be something wrong with me. And then capitalism swoops in and says, and I've got something I can sell you. And
Mhm.
whatever it is I can sell you is going to get you to that happy, glossy, shiny, happy people place. I think that those messages are really damaging.
Yeah.
So frequently I'll be sitting with adults, they're going through something really challenging in their life, and they'll say things like, well, this is so hard. And it's almost like with a kind of disbelief. And I always feel a little bit bad about it, but my response is, yeah, it is. Right. And I don't know where we got this idea that it shouldn't be hard, that we shouldn't experience challenge.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think when I found Buddhism and the first principle was life is suffering, I was like, yes, right?
Thanks for saying it out loud.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you
Yes.
for articulating that because
Yeah.
it is, because by the very virtue of having a mind,
Hmm.
we suffer, right? Attaching meaning to things, attaching outcomes we want to happen, right? Attaching desire, all of those things create suffering. So absolutely. and I'm actually, not to derail this, but, Twitch, the dancer who just took his own life, everyone's shocked, but he looked so happy, but he had this beautiful wife, but he had these children, but he was always smiling. And it's like, there's this, again, it goes back to what you were saying. There's this idea that if you reach this capitalistic pinnacle of success, that there's no way on earth you could be unhappy or depressed or feel despair or feel like, you're not enough, or, and who knows? I mean, I lost my identical twin to suicide.
Mm.
And part of that loss was realizing, like, at some point there's nothing you can do to save another person. Just like there's nothing you can do to make someone happy, right?
Yeah.
People have their own suffering.
Right.
And we have to, I feel like that what I learned from that experience, what I continue to embrace is that life is hard. You're going to suffer. Terrible things are going to happen to you. And it's not a matter of why me, it's a matter of why not me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to put a pin in that real quick. But one of the things, well, also thank you for sharing with us about your sister. And I can
Sure.
only imagine how much suffering is wrapped up in that. So,
Yeah.
thank you for being vulnerable with that. One of the things I find helpful in talking about the Buddhist concept of suffering is to not always use the word suffering too. So sometimes I'll use unpleasantness, right?
Hmm.
Because I think sometimes when they hear that life is full of suffering, they think like big T trauma
Right.
and don't understand how much the little T trauma stuff, right? Which obviously exceeds the clinical definition of unpleasantness, but I think it helps scale it. That
Hmm.
the things that we're going to be challenged with and that are going to be obstacles in our path aren't always big T trauma incidents. And if you haven't experienced those, it doesn't mean that your suffering is any less valid because it comes in all shapes and sizes.
Right.
Um, but I wanted to use your words of why me. One of the examples that I talk about, just kind of from an existential perspective and a meaning making perspective, but using those exact words is when my daughter was born. She was diagnosed after several hours with Down syndrome and a congenital heart defect that would require surgery within the first year of her life. And I can remember feeling that, why me? Why me? And then months went on and her personality started to emerge and she's amazing and fun and wonderful. And our lives were so different than those scary first moments seemed like they would be. And she made it through her heart surgery fine. And I started to open up to all of the gifts that this life brought. And it brought me back to that same phrase of like, why me? Like
Hmm.
what, and was always interesting to me to be able to be like same words, completely different perspective. And that
Hmm.
I think it really, so much of how we overcome our suffering, I think is in how we're able to frame it and the ways that we're able to reframe it for ourselves
Yeah.
in more positive ways.
Yeah. That's exactly right. I mean, and I think that's how you thrive
Hmm.
ultimately, is when you take that perception and you remove yourself in a sense, like it isn't personal.
Right.
Right? This isn't, you're not being punished. You didn't do anything wrong. And I think it depends on your own spiritual beliefs. Maybe you don't have any, right?
Hmm.
Maybe there's nothing you can hang your hat on, so to speak. But if you do have something to hang your hat on, there's sometimes meaning that you can assign in a different way that isn't so much about personal responsibility. But I think there's a lot of people out there, and I'm one of them, that believes that there are spiritual lessons sometimes attached to certain things. Not everything. Sometimes you just stub your toe, right? Like it's just a stub toe. But I think I think for larger events like big T trauma, sometimes you can sort of pivot in your mind and you can think, okay, maybe there is a greater plan that I just don't have access to. But I
Hmm.
still have to be here in this moment, right? And I still have to find a way to do more than survive.
Hmm. Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
I think it's really, there's meaning to things sometimes, and then there's no meaning to things other times. I think
Right.
you kind of
Right.
have to be able to discern that, right? But yeah, I don't, it's nothing personal. That's what I want people to understand. Sometimes you're just cartwheeling like Milo, you're having a great day. A sea storm comes and knocks you off course. You lose an arm and you're in an entirely different reality,
Mm-hmm.
And I think every human being has had an experience like that in their lives.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Your experience, for
Oh,
example,
absolutely. Yeah.
right?
Yep.
I mean,
Completely. Yeah. Different train. I was on a different train.
yeah,
It was like,
all of a sudden you're just on a different train and you're like, what's happening,
yeah.
right? You're disoriented, you
Yeah.
know, it's disorienting. And it's so easy to go in your mind, there's something wrong with me. I did something wrong, and I think the comfort that I try to give to parents, to kids, is there's nothing wrong with you,
Hmm.
right? You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes things just happen,
Right.
right? And part of like my own mindfulness practice is just embracing that, like if you're meditating and this, you're meditating and your back hurts. It's really easy to just focus on the pain and build a story around the back pain. And then you just realize, okay, well, there's just pain, right?
That's right. Yeah.
You just embrace it, you
I
know?
think my meditation practice changed. Maybe the moment I became a meditator was I was in a practice and the tip of my nose started to itch. And I was just sitting there and I thought to myself, well, what if I just choose not to respond to this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? To not give in to that, oh, I must alleviate this uncomfortable, weird feeling. I must get myself out of this. And I think that that's a huge part of mindfulness for me is just being able to be in it,
Yeah.
to just be able to say, well, this hurts right now,
Mm-hmm.
or this is uncomfortable right now, or I don't like this. We don't have a lot of tolerance as a society for disliking stuff.
Yeah. You
We
have
want to
to
get out of it.
instantly do something. Yeah. You have to instantly do something about it. You have to get out of it. And I think that's where a lot of people start to, like, they almost try to avoid pain.
Hmm.
So it's like, oh, if I hadn't been, I'm going to use Milo as an example. If I hadn't been swimming in the ocean with my best friend on that day at that moment, I never usually do that. Why did I do it that day? So there's this like, if you had done something different, you would have had a different outcome. And it's sort of like this frenetic, anxiety ridden, I think it's actually pretty common pattern that we have in our minds about how we could have avoided it,
Hmm.
you know?
If
And
only.
if
Hmm.
only I'd done A, B, C, and D, I
Hmm.
could have stopped this from happening.
Right.
And I feel like when you just accept that your nose is going to itch, that you might, that your back's going to hurt, that things are going to happen beyond your control that are unpleasant, then that proclivity towards like I have to do something to prevent suffering from happening starts to wane
Hmm.
over time, and you just start to embrace the moment because okay, there's going to be unpleasantness. This is life we're talking about, right?
Right.
And it's on this gradient that you and I've just discussed, like
Hmm.
it could be as simple as your nose is itchy, or as terrifying as your child has Down syndrome, or you lost your identical twin,
Hmm.
or your parent dies, or you lose your health for a period of time, but I think that practice of sitting with the itchy nose kind of prepares you a little more each time for the big T trauma.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I think that came really true for me during the lockdown portion of COVID. Just we're just going to do this until we're not doing it.
Hmm.
And everybody's like, when are we going to get out? When are we going to be, when will things go back to normal? When? And I was like, when?
Yeah.
Like not with the question mark, but with the period. Like, yeah, when? We will when.
Yeah.
And just be in this day. Just get through this day.
Right.
Don't worry
And
about what the end of it looks like.
find joy in this day.
Yes.
Like when you're focused on wanting this thing that you don't want to happen to end, you're actually not valuing and appreciating this moment,
Hmm.
because there's joy to be had in any moment,
Yeah.
and I think that's what people forget. And
Hmm.
when you're waiting for something to happen, you're actually not living, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and then we raise kids who are constantly racing towards the next goal, and they're missing out on just the joy of being here, of enjoying just life as it is, as it shows up for you, you know? So you miss out,
Right.
and I think when you were talking about capitalism, that's also part of it, right? Like, I got this new sweater, but you know what? There's this even cooler sweater and it's on sale. And if I go get that one, my life will be complete, right?
I will finally love myself when I have like the right outfit. Yes.
And so it's this
I
constant
do.
like chase for
Mhm.
something outside of you, that's going to make your life better. This is
Mhm.
this like never ending, like need for something better that makes us not appreciate what's already good.
Mhm. And now we're tiptoeing towards my favorite concept in the whole wide world, which is gratitude.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think requires mindfulness because you can't notice it if you're not in the moment. But um, I have found a consistent and intentional gratitude practice to be the most life changing thing I've ever done. It really has some deep roots in my own well being and the way that I move through the world.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I
and
think
I
that's
try to teach it in a way that's different than kind of toxic positivity, right?
really
Like,
happy to hear you say that because I
yeah.
was my mind was just going there. Tell me more
Yeah,
about
no. No, for sure, for sure. Well, I actually I love the work of Viktor Frankl. And so his idea of tragic optimism, I often will go back to the quote by Camus of, in the middle of an endless winter, I found within myself an invincible summer. And to me, tragic optimism, gratitude practice is rooted in that, yes, you're in the winter. The winter's real. It's cold. It's unpleasant. There's something inside you, though, that is still shining bright. Be in touch with that. So it doesn't dismiss the challenges that we face. It says, despite this, I can still be whole. I can still find happiness. I can still touch joy. I can still be thankful. And I think about, again, kind of using the example of my daughter's birth. I mean, the people that showed up for us, and that was one of the first really kind of big moments of changing my perception of our journey with her, is seeing how held and supported and loved we were. And it was like, oh, in this really challenging moment, I'm feeling so held and supported and loved. And that was really beautiful.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, and it's about being able to embrace that from others. Not
Mhm.
everybody is able to do that based on their own level of trauma. So that's pretty amazing that you were able to do that. Uh,
Mm.
and I think sometimes people are in such a dark place that even just saying, and I won't go into all the things that I've survived because it's pretty incredible. Like, I mean, when you think about what one human being can go through, I've been through everything you can imagine.
Mm.
And I mean, every possible adversity.
Mhm.
But one of my many moments, I was staring up at my hospital ceiling because I've had some insane amounts of health issues, which I don't normally talk about, but here we are. And I remember I was staring up at the ceiling in the hospital and I was thinking, this sucks,
Mhm.
right? This really sucks. But hey, you know what? That hospital jello is really good, right? Like
Yeah.
I started to laugh thinking like this is what it comes down to. The gratitude can go as small as like I love the hospital jello, right?
Yes.
Or I really love how these scrubs are so comfortable,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
Or, wow, that nurse was so nice. Like, how amazing is that? Right? So you can choose to focus on, like I had a spinal tap for 2 weeks. I wasn't allowed to move for
Mm.
2, I was in a fetal position. But that's the stuff that started to come to me when I invited it in, and I think that's what it is. Like when you invite things, when
Mhm.
you increase your awareness of your whole experience, and it's not just the pain in your back, right? You start to realize, oh my God, look at all these miracles that are happening. If I can just allow myself to open to them, if I can just expand my awareness. So that's, I think, really it's an invitation. That's kind of how I see it for gratitude. It's just
Yeah.
even just the smallest edge, right? Something as simple as the hospital jello, you know, Or I knew I could see outside my window and the cherry blossoms were blooming. And I was like, oh my God, that's gorgeous, right? So it's just that, and that's what Viktor Frankl is I think also talking about, like when you can access a part of you that's timeless, that's
Hmm.
alive, that's whole, that's aware, you can expand that, right? Even in that dark time, even in that hospital room or with your daughter where you were like, what is going on?
Hmm.
You started to be able to see her and the
Yes.
miracle of her, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
your awareness was like huge.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was panoramic. That's what I think it is. It's a panoramic view of what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Zooming out. Yeah.
Mhm.
Where you really get to kind of see that whole big picture. I want to go back to something you said a little while ago. You talked about folks might struggle a little bit more if they don't have a spiritual place to hang their hat.
Yeah.
How do you work with folks who don't have a spiritual place to hang their hat?
Um, I try to just meet them where they are. So I know a lot of people who don't believe in anything but what they can see. And that's totally okay. So let's just practice with what we can see. If we don't believe in anything outside of ourselves, then let's make being inside of ourselves as positive an experience as we can,
Mm.
you know, building that container, that sense of safety, that sense of, I'm really okay. I'm perfect just as I am right here, right now. And my entire experience is valid, you know? And I think I have Pema Chodron to thank for that. Because, I think we all find moms and dads in different ways outside of our own, like physical, biological parents.
Mm.
I feel like Pema Chodron was the mother I always wanted and the teacher that I always needed. And so I've studied so much of what she's written, and I've actually studied with her.
Oh, that's amazing.
And, she talks about that. Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you at all,
Hmm.
right? Really, what meditation does is it helps you come home. It really does.
Yeah.
It brings you back home. And so, if you don't believe that there's another home outside of you, that's fine. You already have a home.
Right.
Let's come home and let's work with what's going on, what's going on in your mind, what's going on emotionally. I feel like I feel like that's what I do because, when you work with kids, they don't necessarily know what God is. They don't know what a bigger thing is. They haven't developed that yet.
Hmm.
That takes time. So you work with them exactly where they are, in this moment. Let's just be fully embodied. And what does that mean? You know?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
For listeners who might not know, what does that mean?
Fully
Being
embodied.
fully embodied. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
being fully embodied means being fully present with your physical sensations,
Hmm.
um, fully aware of, how your feet feel on the floor, how your breath feels in your body, and allowing your mind to kind of rest with your breath. So if you can, right? Sometimes we can't. Sometimes monkey mind takes over
That's right.
but it's accepting where you are and trying to be as present within your body as you can, as you're capable of.
Hmm. Hmm. Even if it means accepting that the monkeys are active that day, right?
Even yeah,
Just it's a
exactly.
neutral statement, like, oh, active monkeys today. That's what we've got. Yeah.
Yeah, embracing your whole experience.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in a session a few weeks ago and I fully realized like, "Oh my god, I cannot be present right now." I'm trying to be, but even just acknowledging, "Oh, I'm floating away," was bringing me back to being present.
Right. Right. When I teach meditation, I'll have people, they'll say, I did a 20-minute sit, and 15 times in 20 minutes, I noticed that my thoughts were floating away to some other topic. And I was like, that's beautiful. That was 15 victories.
Yeah,
And I think people get like, oh, I should be able to empty my mind. I should be able, to master this practice. And it just doesn't seem like that's the way it works out for most of us. And it really is just being able to say, oh, thoughts drifted away again, and I'm bringing them back. That is the point of the practice.
exactly. Yeah. And one of the techniques I teach parents and kids is called the power of three.
Mhm.
So you put one hand on your chest, one hand on your stomach, and both feet on the ground.
Mm.
And that's your power, right? That's where you can go, oh, I'm monitoring my breath. I'm breathing. I'm here, physically present, rooted in this moment. And so and it's a really simple exercise. It's even in the book, in my
Mm-hmm.
kids' book, you know? Yeah. So it's like very simple, but really powerful stuff
Mm-hmm.
because, oh my, and I still do it throughout my day when I'm at work. Like I'll just put my hand on my chest sometimes and go, oh, okay. Like I remind myself to take a deep breath just by
Right.
that one simple action. And
Yeah.
that's meditation. People don't realize when you just come back to the moment simply, that's mindfulness. That's a moment of meditation,
Right. Right.
you know?
Yeah. I always try to explain when I'm teaching it that the practice of sitting on a cushion, like anybody can do that for an hour, right? Like it is about that awareness and then being able to take it off the cushion and do it in your life. But that meditation isn't even really the goal. It's a
Right.
tool to be able to live more mindfully. And we can practice that in this seated posture. Um, I love that you've given a couple examples about feet on the ground because that's actually for me my go-to. Is can I
Mhm.
feel my feet? And I've often joked it's because I'm often in my head and my feet are as far away from my head as they can be. So I really have to get in my body and travel the whole length of it to be able to feel my feet.
I totally get that.
And the breathing doesn't always work for me, to bring my awareness to the breath. Like that's not always, it's not always a strong enough anchor. If I'm
Yeah.
really, really in my head, where I find the visceral part of either my feet on the ground or to feel something underneath my seat is a
Mhm.
little bit more. It's just more tangible. My brain can hold to that a little bit better than just the breath. I can get into a good rhythmic breathing that just looks like like ACEs kind of meditation. And I'm not paying any attention to that. My body is just breathing that way. I'm like, no, this is a lie. I'm not really paying attention to the breath. It just looks good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I find like the physical association with my breath, with my hands and my feet really help me get like, oh, okay, I'm like breathing. I'm consciously and actively and intentionally breathing,
That's right.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
not just my autonomic nervous system doing what it does.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I always joke I did yoga for decades before I started to really practice meditation regularly. And I'm like, I can do Jaya breath like yogic breathing. I'm like, I can do that without even thinking about it. And that it took me a while when I first was getting certified as a meditation teacher to realize that that's what I was doing. I was like, oh, Courtney, you're not paying any attention to your breath right now at all. It just sounds good. It sounds like yoga class. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And breath work itself is having a moment.
sure
I
is. Hmm.
Yeah, I've noticed that. There's a guy on Instagram that I'm now connected to who teaches it in England. He teaches breath work.
Okay.
Um, Josh, what's his last name? I can't remember, but he's super into it. And I think like I want to explore that a little more. Like I guess it's basically holotropic breathing, right? Like what they did in the 60s with primal scream therapy and right, like all of that breathing stuff. It's interesting. I think
It is.
I
I think
think it
one of the avenues that I've been exploring more and more is nervous system response. So you mentioned before the autonomic nervous system, we're just breathing, but um, the more informed I become about the way our nervous systems interact with our world, the more I'm recognizing this connection between mindfulness and being able to regulate our nervous system using the breath and the way that our nervous system is just feels like it's just constantly under assault,
yeah,
and that seems to be, I went to grad school and studied CBT, and so my
yeah,
whole training was, well, it's what we think, and it's what we think about what's happening to us that causes distress. And I'm like, or maybe our primal nervous system is constantly activated because we live in a world that's never quiet, never dark. There's always some kind of bodily assault happening or
yeah,
thought assault happening. We live in a tough world, and I don't think that we remember that we're creatures.
yeah.
We're very fancy humans, but we're still creatures.
We are. I mean, we still have that, amygdala, right? Our fight or flight part of our brain, the reptilian brain, right? So, yeah, we are. We're creatures and we think we're all that, right?
Yep.
Like, oh, we're so different from dogs and cats and dolphins and whales, but really we're not.
Right.
And, if a dolphin had to be online all day, right? I mean, it's a funny visual, but think about it. We weren't built to be online, constantly being assaulted by stimuli.
Right.
We do better and now there's a whole forest therapy movement, right? Like people
Yeah.
who are forest therapy certified, and I get it. Like we are meant to live in green nature, in harmony with animals, in harmony with seasons and cycles, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
really what we were meant to do. So it's like no wonder people are melting down in this age of technology.
Right.
I
Right.
You and I remember a time before technology. Things were
Mm-hmm.
slower. If somebody called, you could or could not pick up the phone, and that was a choice, but the phone didn't follow you everywhere you went.
Right. Right. Right.
You had this option to engage,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't anymore.
Right.
We just don't. Even if you don't want your phone on you, there's a million reasons why we need them now.
Mm-hmm.
Like it has a flashlight.
Right.
It's like if I'm in the dark and I need a flashlight, my phone is super important and powerful, right?
Right. Yeah.
There's just so much that has changed. And I think, when your very primitive nervous system still functions in that like fight or flight mode because
Mm-hmm.
it's there to alert you, and getting an email triggers that fight or flight,
Mm-hmm.
and the cortisol levels and the adrenaline and all the things that happen. Yeah, we need mindfulness. We
Mm-hmm.
need to be able to go, okay, wait a minute. I need to kind of reground, get my body back to center, you know?
Right. Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I also love the research that's come out of mindfulness that tells us that we do have the capacity to rewire those
Mhm.
learned responses. That if we feel we must always be on, we must always be accessible. If this is a story that we've been conditioned towards, mindfulness can actually help us create new neural pathways that embrace a different way of knowing, of being
Mhm.
able to just debate those societal messages and decide intentionally if that's a way you want to live or not.
Right. Yeah, you can notice the thought patterns and go, "Oh, I'm having this thought again.
Right.
Let's investigate that. Where is
Right.
that coming from?" That observing ego, that's so important, and mindfulness helps you accomplish that, right? It
Yeah.
helps you go, "Wait, I have this belief. Hmm, what is that bringing up for me? Why do I think this? Do I really need to pay attention to this?"
Yeah.
You know?
Curiosity in beginner's mind. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Again, we're so conditioned that we should know.
right.
We're not super great at always being like, "Oh, I don't know, but let me explore." We've
Right.
lost like that part. Yeah.
Mhm.
And mindfulness helps bring us back to that.
It does. And we can notice if something that we're doing is causing us more suffering.
Mhm.
Like, oh,
Yes.
you know what I mean? Like you're able to go, oh, I just react every time my phone dings.
Right.
Maybe I should silence the phone. Or, like you start to realize that the things that you're habitually doing are maybe causing more suffering. And how can you love yourself more? How can you nurture yourself more?
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
start to change that relationship with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? But that ability to know, to first become aware that that's happening, and then be able to go, oh, maybe I can do these things to nurture myself more. That's what our society needs.
Mhm. Mhm.
We have a lot of people going out and expressing rage in ways that are really harmful to our children, to other people, all this gun violence. And if only we could teach people how to sit with those difficult emotions, and then how to release them in a way that's positive, to express them and then to release them. I think mindfulness is the answer.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
building distress tolerance, all of those things that, we're seeing are having such a ripple effect in our society.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah, and I think it's yeah, when we first made contact and I was thinking about like how mindfulness shows up in the child parent relationship, one of the things that really came to mind for me was this idea of like as the parent, I need to deal with the ways I've been traumatized so that I can then respond to my child without my own activation.
Mhm.
And so one of the uh, lessons that came to me a while ago was, I always forget his first two initials, but Winnicott, the British
Yeah,
pediatrician from the 50s, that talked about the good enough mother, which that's obviously dated, but this idea that to be the good enough mother, you needed to withstand your child's rage. And I really found that to be one of the most powerful lessons I've ever learned as a parent. And what that really required of me was to not become activated when my child was distressed. And I
yeah,
can only not be activated if I deal with my own nervous system, right? And my own traumas and my own ability to be distressed and to just say, okay, well, you're having a feeling right now, and I'm going to let you have that, and I don't have to respond to it.
yeah, and I'm not going anywhere because
Right.
I
Yeah.
have the capacity to stay
Yep.
with my own experience and with your experience,
Yep. Yep.
you know? Yeah, and that's meditation really helps you establish that ability and building that again, that container, what I call the container. How
Right.
can you be a good enough mother if you're constantly living in activation mode? If you're if every time your child has big emotions, it triggers you to the point where you just lash out
Right. Right. Or shut down, or
down, right?
emotionally abandoned. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that that's the crux. And it was funny, right after I first came across that, I think, on 10% Happier podcast. And then
Mhm.
right after hearing about this, I took my son, he was, I don't know, maybe 10 at the time, on a hike. And it turned out to be a much longer, much steeper hike than I anticipated. And he kept trying to quit. And he would sit down on the trail and cross his arms, and I'm not going any further. And this was very top of mind because I had just listened to this podcast about it. And so I just waited him out, and I didn't get upset. Normally I would have been upset. I would have been, I'm trying to do this great thing for you. You don't want to do it. My feelings would have been hurt. And I just really let myself, like, not become activated. And we made it to the waterfalls. And then we had an amazing time. And I taught him the joy of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches on a trail, and let him go in the water, which he was not expecting I was going to let him do. And I remember at one point we're sitting on the rocks eating our lunch, and he just looks at me and he goes, "It was worth it." And I was
Oh,
like, "Oh, I'm so glad that I was able to, like, I was able to be with him in his frustration of doing this hard thing, and not allow myself to get roped into his reaction, and just
right.
stay steady, stay calm." And
That's
then, yeah,
beautiful. Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
So,
Well, I think you gave him the gift of letting him have his emotions,
yeah.
having his own experience, instead of trying to foist your expectations and your own desire of what you wanted this experience to be.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know what I mean? And like when you give kids that space to just feel what they're feeling, eventually their nervous system calms down because you're there, right? You're
Right.
there. You're like the parentheses and they're in the center, right? And you're like, okay, I'm going to be the parentheses on your emotional experience right now. And when you're ready, right, and you're calm, we can go on. And
Mhm.
that's what
Mhm.
kids really need.
Yeah.
And I think, back in the day, like nobody knew what emotional intelligence was.
Right.
This is a relatively new concept. Parents are just like, go play in the backyard,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And spanking was a thing.
Yes.
I mean, I went through it. It was horrible.
Same.
I'm a very fierce advocate of not spanking your kids.
Yep.
Part of that is being able to have the awareness around your of emotional intelligence. What does that mean? How do you get there? What are the outcomes? I think a lot of parents still believe that children are an extension of them
Yes.
and they try to control them, and they don't let their child have their own experience of life because they're just swooping in all the time with, I'm the parent, you should listen to me, and there's a lot of intimidation that goes on and kids are they're small, it's scary.
Mhm.
So and when you have that ability to sit with your emotions, you have a language for your emotions, you're a therapist, so you have all that, which is amazing,
Mhm.
but a lot of parents don't. So
Mhm.
sometimes like I start at the beginning when I teach parents, what is resilience? What is emotional intelligence? How do we build that?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what parents really need. I feel like we need a whole movement around parent education, resiliency training. That's what I'm doing at First Five is I'm actually teaching those skills.
Right.
Parents are so open to it. A lot of them are refugees that came here. They're English as a second language, dealing with all of those challenges. And yet they're the first ones to sign up for the classes. And it's amazing. I feel so humbled by that,
For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
They want to know, like, what is it? How do I do it? I was teaching mindfulness a few months ago to a group of 15 moms, and some of them didn't want to put their babies in the childcare that was available. So they were holding the babies. The babies were crying. And I'm like, we're going to do this. This is part of the work. This is
Yes.
right? This is the work. So I was actually kind of excited. And so I started to do the work and the baby stopped crying.
Yeah.
Because the moms got calmer.
I was just going to say they responded to the mom's
It was
nervous system, I'm
amazing.
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So amazing. And the moms came up to me after and they said, and I started crying because it was the most beautiful moment. And they were just like, you changed my life.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, oh my God, but you changed your life.
Right. Right.
I'm just the parentheses.
Yeah. 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 Very meta right there. That's really amazing. I also love the idea of go ahead and practice meditation with a screaming child because I think we also get caught in our head of it must look a certain way, must be quiet, it must be serene. I must have a cute little, you know, set up in the corner that looks
Right.
like a mini spa. And like, no, why don't you just go ahead and do that while your kids are like jumping on the bed in the next room? And if you could get yourself calm and centered, then you can do it anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. I even gave them, John Kabat-Zinn has this trick where you take like little circular stickers.
Mm-hmm.
Have you done this? And you put them everywhere you go. That's somewhere you're going to look at.
Uh-huh.
So, like, I had them put it on their car, on their mirror in their car, in their kitchen cabinets, in the bathroom, on the bathroom mirror. And it's just a reminder to breathe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So every
Yeah.
time you see that sticker, take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Jenna, was there anything that we didn't get to that you had wanted to say? Did we
Well,
miss
I just want to
anything?
say thank you for having me. And if anybody is interested, feel free to, contact me on themiloway.com. I'm happy to, I offer coaching and books. I have a book and a blog. So it's out there for parents and kids. And that's really why I'm here, is to be of service. So please don't be shy. I'm here. And just thank you for having me, Courtney. It's been so
Yes.
lovely chatting with you.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it so much. And I'll link to everything. And I can attest that the website is wonderful. There's so many great resources on your website. So I'll definitely make sure that that is in the show notes. And we'll link to your Instagram, which is where we found each other. And we'll make sure that anybody who's interested can find your work. Thank you so much, Jenna. Listeners, I'll be right back after a short break. Many thanks to Jenna for being with us today. If you have questions, topic ideas, or comments, please send them to me at Courtney@shineandsoar.com. You can also complete the contact form on shineandsoar.com/podcast. If you're loving this content, please share it with your people because they may love it too. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on your podcast app of choice. We'll be back next week with a new episode. See you then. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other.